Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
The latest and the dramatic turn in Afghanistan persuades us to keep national interest still focused on that country or that story. And today, looking at the situation there, we raise a question. The question is, or maybe a bunch of questions. Does the turn in Afghanistan highlight a vital paradox in our strategic culture or in our thinking, or in the way the debate is shaped within the subcontinent and internationally about the subcontinent? Could it be that our debate has been unfairly or overwhelmingly dominated by history rather than geography? Never mind the fact that geography is the geo in geostrategy and geopolitics. And is this about to change now with these changes in Afghanistan? So that is the complexity we are looking at in this week's National Interest. But before I go further with the argument, let me also remind you that today, please do wish a happy birthday, a happy 4th birthday to ThePrint. We are 4 years old. This Friday, it's been an eventful 4 years. Also, your numbers, readers, subscribers, watchers have increased greatly, and your feedback we get from you has also increased greatly, both in quality as well as numbers. So thank you very much for being there. On ThePrint's 4th birthday, let me also wish you a wonderful year going ahead, and we promise you nothing but the best, the most accurate coverage of the most important events and analysis and opinion, at which point I get back to the point. So the point is, does history shape geography, or is it the other way around? You might say this is a chicken or egg question. Pehle murga aaya ki pehle anda aaya, right? Is cyclical hai. So maybe it is cyclical, but there are junctures in time when you can review this situation, or when one becomes more dominant than the other. Because in our region, in India's region, particularly to our west, if you look to India's west, then you would see that the vast region or the vast landmass to India's west, which is Pakistan, Afghanistan, etc., geography has shaped history, and that has dominated our strategic thought for all three countries there. We are explaining today in this national interest what makes us say so, and then arguing why all this can change now and why geography is now poised to lose its dominance over the subcontinent's future, and history is poised to lose its domination over the subcontinent's debate. Now, the central pillar of the argument is that geography has been Afghanistan's strategic curse. So, what is the argument? That geography has been Afghanistan's strategic curse. It's been Pakistan's strategic gift or blessing. It has been India's great distraction. So, geography is a curse for Afghanistan. It's a blessing for Pakistan, has been a blessing for Pakistan, and has been a mega distraction for India. Why do you say so? We'll explain it first. We'll explain all three and then tell you why we think this is changing. So Afghanistan has always been an ultra-poor, deeply conservative, mostly Islamic, divided on tribal lines, very sparsely populated, and very poorly governed landlocked nation lying between the warring great powers of the day. So in the 19th century, it was the buffer state between the imperial British power and Tsarist Russia. So the great game was played there, and Afghanistan was a victim. In the 20th century, the Cold War, it was the country closest to the softest part of Soviet Union's southern underbelly, that is next to Soviet Union's Islamic republics, or the nations today which are called by some Americans the stans, because Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan thoda confusing ho jata hai, right? The stans. So Afghanistan was next to them, and Soviet Union, Soviet power was worried about them. That's the reason the Americans thought that this is where you start pushing at the Soviet power, because this is their weakest the weakest part of their underbelly or Achilles heel. And that's how Pakistan became America's frontline state. So we'll also tell you what happened with Pakistan. But Afghanistan then again faced the brunt of superpower rivalry, because that next Cold War was fought in Afghanistan or through Afghanistan. And that's why the Americans based their U-2s in Peshawar, which would fly over Afghanistan and go spying over the Soviet Union. In fact, one of those was shot down, and Francis Gary Powers, its pilot, was taken prisoner, and Khrushchev at that point said that we can also target places from where these planes are flying. Anyway, we'll come to Pakistan. Now, Afghanistan had a lot of this khijatani going on because Soviets wanted to control Afghanistan now as their buffer state. So they influenced who ruled Afghanistan, and in that tussle, usually the Soviets got the better of America. But the fact is that the power that Soviet supported regimes exercised in Kabul did not matter so much outside of Kabul and some other major cities. So other places, tribals, religious heads, they had their own power, they collected their own tribute, etc. So when time came to challenge that pro-Soviet power there, immediately Americans and the Pakistanis look at the Islamists, and they thought they'll be able to use Islam to rally the rest, particularly in the Pakhtun areas, and create trouble for the ruling regime of the day. That was going on already. It was simmering for some time. And then 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan because they were so irritated and so insecure about this Pakistan-American activity in Afghanistan using these Islamic guerrillas. They thought their government will fall, or a government friendly to them will fall, and a government not friendly to them will be installed, that they invaded Afghanistan. As that happened, then Americans and all their allies got the fullest opportunity to come and fight this phase of the Cold War, the decisive phase of the Cold War in Afghanistan. So once again, Afghanistan became a battleground. So once again, Afghanistan's geography became its curse. In 1989, the Russians were leaving. By 1991, Mujahideen were in control. Americans had lost interest in Afghanistan. So used and thrown. Afghanistan has been used and thrown thrice. So this was again used and thrown. It had been used to fight the Cold War. The Cold War had been won. Now there was no use for Afghanistan. It was left alone. And that is when Pakistan started playing its own games and helping build the Taliban as a force through which it thought it will control Afghanistan better, because the Taliban was brought up in madrasas on the Pakistani side of the Durand line. Once again, Afghanistan was a victim. And then 2001, when 9/11 happened and all the Al-Qaeda networks, etc., were traced to the Afghan region, mostly in Afghanistan, once again, it became the main battle zone of a global war. In this case, it wasn't the Cold War, it wasn't one superpower against another. It was the American power or the Western power or the NATO power versus its biggest threat then, which was the global pan-Islamic network of terrorists. And they were headquartered, the nub of all that was in Afghanistan. So they came to fight another war there. And once again, Pakistan became their ally. And that war was also fought in Afghanistan. That war is now over. It has left Afghanistan quite damaged, as we can see. So that's the reason we say geography has been Afghanistan's curse until now. Because if Afghanistan wasn't located here, and it was located maybe 1,000 kilometers to the north, none of this would have happened to it. But this is what's happened. Now, the great game passed Pakistan by because it only came into being in 1947. So great game to tab tak over tha. But Second World War had ended and a new Cold War had just started. New Cold War means Soviet bloc, American bloc or the Western bloc. Now, Once again, this was the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union. So Americans wanted to do some things through Afghanistan, or at least they wanted to secure the eastern borders of Afghanistan. So communist power, one, will not spread into Afghanistan, and through Afghanistan will not spread into the rest of the world. Remember, Iran was an American ally for a very long time. They didn't want too much Russian power coming into that country as well for a long time. So there, who was their ally? India wasn't going to be their ally. In any case, India wasn't close enough. So Pakistan became a natural ally. So Pakistan became a frontline state. As Pakistan became a frontline state, by the mid-50s, it was a member of American-led military organizations, SEATO, CENTO, etc., Baghdad Pact. It began to get the military goodies, the American gravy train arrived, everything. And Pakistanis thought, they were not bothered about what America's interests were. They thought this was a cheap, or in fact a freebooting way of arming themselves and making themselves stronger economically against India, because that was their target. So that's the reason we say their geography became their blessing. Now this continued on till 1971, when you might have thought that maybe the Americans are getting tired. Pakistanis had fought a stupid war in 1965, which yielded them nothing. War with India. Americans had their issues. They were tired with Vietnam. So there was an impression that maybe they will not be that interested in Pakistan, and maybe that love affair will die. But that is when Nixon and Kissinger decided to make their big outreach to China. For that, again, Pakistan became the matchmaker, and it was enabled in doing that because of its political relationship with China, but also its physical proximity to China. So you could come to Pakistan and from there silently, quietly go to China without anybody noticing. Remember, it was 1971, flight radar and all those websites were not there where you could track any plane going anywhere. ये बहुत पहले की बात है. Now, so once again, Pakistan became a stalwart ally of the Americans, almost entirely because of its location. Once again, you thought that maybe Pakistan's big allies will get tired of it, because Cold War was now being fought elsewhere. And then the Soviets came into Afghanistan, 1979. The moment that happened, the Americans thought, boom, they did something to us in Vietnam. We went out to fight a war against their interests, an ideological war against Soviet bloc's interests in Vietnam, far away from our shores. Now they are fighting far away from their country. So let's now defeat them there. And then again, they needed the Pakistanis. So Pakistan, Cold War I, Pakistan was a key ally as a frontline state. Cold War Phase 2, Pakistan became a key ally, not just as a frontline state, but as a staging post for the whole Mujahideen campaign, the entire quote-unquote good jihad of that period. Now, the Cold War was won by 1989-1990, 1991, exactly 30 years back, as I told you in yesterday's Cut the Clutter. Soviet Union disintegrated. So once again, the Americans lost interest because now the Cold War was over. We were in a unipolar world, and this is where you see, as the America's vested interest in Pakistan goes down, it ebbs, America's interest in India rises. And 1991 onwards, there were a couple of difficult years after that, 92, 93. But after that, just as America is also learning to deal with the new world, and India under Narasimha Rao is also changing itself to deal with this new world, the process of American warming up towards India begins. And that is the very beginning of the process of dehyphenation of US policy to the subcontinent. Dehyphenation means earlier they also looked at it as their policy for India-Pakistan, India-Pakistan. India's demand always was dehyphenate. Look at India, look at Pakistan differently. Don't connect us. And that process started in those about a decade when America did not need Pakistan for any extraneous purposes or for its larger security needs. And then suddenly, dramatically, it all changed. Pakistan's geographical, locational luck turned again when those planes slammed into the Twin Towers in New York, and almost within 48 hours, everybody knew where the nerve center of Al-Qaeda was. It was in Afghanistan, but generally in a region which later came to be known as the Af-Pak region. Now, you had a strange situation that Pakistan was described as a global migraine because of what was happening in the Af-Pak region. And yet, if the Americans wanted to fight Al-Qaeda or wage a global war on terror or even catch or kill Osama bin Laden, they could not have done it without Pakistan's support. So once again, Pakistan became, now they were described as a stalwart ally in the war on terror. Now, however they ran that war and what's happened lately by way of Taliban defeating the Americans, that's a different point. But the fact is that for these 20 years, Pakistan became an indispensable ally of the Americans. Once again, purely because of where it's located on the map of the world and on the map of this region. Now, India. Why do we say this has been a great strategic distraction for India? Look at the map of India after 1947. We inherited about 15,000 kilometers of land borders, mostly in our north, west and east. Now, those land borders, about half of that was with a country which was hostile to India from day one. That is Pakistan. Remember, then Pakistan, east and west were together. From day one, within a few years, in less than a decade, the country with which we shared the half of the rest of the borders, that is China, about 3,500 kilometers, that also became an adversary. So our attention got focused on the north and the west, on our land frontiers. And we were then fighting mentally, strategically, militarily, philosophically for territory. So our credo became, our armed forces credo became, we will not give an inch of our country's land to anybody, which means mostly China and Pakistan. Some of it changed later because Bangladesh broke away, and lately, say for the past 20 years, Bangladesh has become much friendlier. Today it's at its friendliest since, I would say, 1971, 72, 73. It's a good situation right now. So that border is not a worry. Yet, India's strategic thought still remains focused on the land borders. Chinese sitting there, Pakistan is sitting there, terror groups coming in through LAC, etc. That has localized our thinking, and that's where tactical has superseded the strategic in our thinking. Because what that has done is, it has made us take our eye off our vast coastline. Our coastline is about 7,500 kilometers. And look at India's coastline. Look at the Indian Peninsula. On the east, it opens out in the Bay of Bengal. On the west, it opens out in the vast expanses of the Arabian Sea. Way down south, it opens out in the larger Indian Ocean, reaches straight out to Africa with large open oceans between India's southern tip and Africa, right up to Australia. So this coastline is the zone of opportunity, because along with the coastline also lies an enormous exclusive economic zone. There are also two wonderful island assets, both to the peninsula's east, that is the Andaman and Nicobars, and to the west, that is Lakshadweep. But India did not focus on any of that. All these were an opportunity. So India spent 75 years looking at the threat on the land borders, but missed out the opportunity across its maritime borders. Because remember, India's maritime Indian power also straddles some of the world's most important sea lanes. Now, why do we say that the latest turn in Afghanistan might change all this? How can Afghanistan get rid of its geographical curse? How can Pakistan be robbed of its geographical blessing? And how can India get a respite from its geographical distraction? So here we are. Russia is now a bit player. Nobody will go to Afghanistan to fight Russia. Russia will also not go to Afghanistan to fight anything. They've done it once and suffered. Russia's only interest in Afghanistan is that this Talibani Islamist virus should not travel into the former Russian Central Asian republics, because they worry it gets there, it will get elsewhere in Russia. They have their own problems in some parts of Russia with old Muslim communities. They don't want any of that to come in there. So they are quite happy whatever happens in Afghanistan as long as none of this comes in there. So if Taliban are stable, if Afghanistan is stable, Russians have nothing to worry about. In any case, no Americans will now go to Afghanistan to fight Russia, nor will the Chinese come there, because Chinese also have the same interest as the Russians in Afghanistan, that is to prevent the same virus that the Russians want to not to travel to their former Central Asian republics. Chinese don't want to come into their contiguous region, which is Xinjiang, and which has the Muslim Uyghurs. So as long as the Chinese can shield Xinjiang, they are okay. They are not bothered about Afghanistan. They have zero stakes there. So what this does is, it denies Pakistan its privilege as a frontline state, which it was in the Cold War, or as a key ally in the fight against the Soviets in the second phase of the Cold War, and third, as a stalwart ally in the global war on terror. However awfully Biden may have disgraced himself with his incompetent bumbling or his bumbling incompetence, you can choose the sequence, he's not about to send Pakistan a thank you card for enabling Taliban to hand out such a humiliating defeat to him and his country in Afghanistan. That story is now over. On the other hand, if Afghanistan unravels again, what is our fear? What if Afghanistan unravels again, or it remains unraveled? Then Pakistan will be on its own. Even the Chinese would then weigh their options, because that would threaten their mega investments in CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, because they would want Afghanistan to be stable, and they will count on Pakistan to keep it stable, not to play games there, not to start using Afghanistan to play games maybe against India and again mess it up. In any case, no big power will now see any utility for Pakistan in that region. Now, frankly, Pakistanis have this nutty romance for strategic depth. Now, if you look at the topography, look at the mountains, certainly Pakistan cannot put any of its forces in Afghanistan to protect them from Indian military. It simply doesn't work like that. You don't climb those mountains and go to the other side. It doesn't work like that. But Pakistan might have thought that they can use Afghanistan as strategic depth for their terror groups. See, if you read that latest book by Adrian Levy and Kathy Scott Clark, Spy Games, there the Pakistanis, ISI, has obviously told them that, look, we had no idea about Pulwama. In fact, we were shocked by Pulwama. And then, but who planned Pulwama? It was planned by Jaish-e-Mohammed. No, this was planned by Jaish-e-Mohammed at its setup, at its camp in Helmand in Afghanistan. So to that extent, this was strategic depth for terror. Now, if the Pakistanis try and do any of that, they should try and remember that all these years when they thought they should use Afghanistan for strategic depth, actually it is the Taliban who used Pakistan instead for their strategic depth. Now, having won from there, Taliban, how willing will they be to let Pakistan run their country? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't think so. I don't think also it's going to be so easy for the Taliban to take control of the country at this point of time. Now, where does it leave India? In India, we have much knee-jerk paranoia about a new Terroristan coming up between Pakistan and Afghanistan, or a Talibanistan, that Pakistan will also get Talibanized. It will be one landmass filled with angry Muslims who will turn on India. That is, you want to be paranoid, as Steve Cohen used to teach us. Sometimes nations look at the mirror and they make faces at themselves, and then they get scared by what they see. So a country can get paranoid very easily. But the fact is, look at the reality. Pakistan has zero ability militarily, economically, diplomatically, or strategically or geostrategically to create a Terroristan along with Afghanistan, along with the Taliban-run Afghanistan targeted at India. They simply don't have the wherewithal. They might have the urge, but they don't have the wherewithal. In the first phase of Cold War, the same blessing of geography cost Pakistan more than half of its country in 1971. In the second phase, that is 1979-91, they destroy their infant democracy. That is when Bhutto was hanged and Zia took over for 9 years. They destroyed their infant democracy, their institutions, and brought in Islamization. In fact, Bhutto had started bringing in Islamization, and Zia then took it to yet another level. In the war on terror, their per capita income, see what's happened to their per capita income. When I first went to Pakistan in 1985, I was quite taken aback by how much better off the Pakistanis seemed to be than India. And their per capita income was higher. Now, if I take 1990 as the cutoff year, because that is the year in which they have won the Cold War for the Americans. So they've got all the goodies, everything from the Americans, all the dollars have been spilling all over Pakistan. In 1990, Pakistan's per capita income, according to World Bank data, based on PPP, purchasing power parity, that is the last year for which PPP data is available, Pakistan's per capita income is about $1,900, $1,920. India is about $1,200. So you can see that it's more than 50% higher than India. So they were that far ahead. But the Pakistanis thought, ठीक है बेटा, हम भी सीख गए Americans से, because Americans taught us so many espionage, dirty tricks also when we were training the Mujahideen and running them. So let's now work those. So in this case, the pupil became smarter than the master, than the teacher, and the Pakistanis decided to use the same methods against India in Kashmir, Punjab, elsewhere. See what has it done to Pakistan in the next 30 years. In the next 30 years, Pakistan's per capita income, which was about 55% higher than India's, is now reversed. Today, India's per capita income is 37% higher than Pakistan's. In fact, that is despite India trying, unfortunately, so hard over the past 2 years to restore parity a little bit or narrow the gap. But the gap is still very large. Also, you have this paradox, a double paradox, where Bangladesh, the supposed basket case of original Pakistan, the average Bangladeshi this year has a much higher income than a Pakistani. The gap has been widening over the years in Bangladesh's favor. This year it's even higher than India. So Pakistanis should know that shorn of American benevolence, they have zero capacity to threaten India through Afghanistan or carry forward this blood feud through Afghanistan. Because if it does so, it will be scrambling to save its own western regions abutting Afghanistan. Now, having said that, I know I cannot guarantee this will not happen, because the Pakistanis' record of learning from their own blunders is not great. Because if they had, then they would not have continued making them again and again. But right now, it is not an inevitability. It is also not a great likelihood, because the strategic picture has changed. And why has it changed? This is the reason we say that the latest turn in Afghanistan has changed the dominance of geography in our region. If only we in India would leave our Pakistan obsession aside, which is not easy, even forget Afghanistan for now and don't give Pakistan the gift of a new regional Cold War with them in Afghanistan, or a proxy war with them in Afghanistan. We haven't been defeated by the Taliban in Afghanistan. We were not fighting about the Americans have been defeated. Let them lick their wounds and deal with their wounded pride as well. It's no skin off India's nose. India should take its eye away from Afghanistan. India should give up its obsession with Pakistan. This is in fact India's opportunity to look beyond its overland threats, because Pakistan is going to be more and more caught up in Afghanistan now. This is the time for India. It's a golden opportunity. For the first time in 75 years, India can shift its strategic gaze from north to the south, that is, to the coast, to the maritime opportunity. That is not an opportunity India should lose now.